Are you ready to learn how to think like a futurist? I'm Jane McGonigal. I'm a research director at the Institute for the Future here in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I am so excited to be your lead instructor for this brand new specialization in futures thinking developed exclusively for Coursera learners like you. In this specialization, you'll learn how to be ready for a changing world. You'll learn the skills and mindsets of the world's top futurists so you can anticipate what's coming, discover new creative possibilities, thrive in really uncertain and volatile times, and seize control of your own future. During this training, you will build your future forecasting skills, learn how to use the Institute for the Future's most powerful foresight tools designed to help you spot new opportunities for innovation and invention. Gain insight into the most important new technologies, global events, and big ideas that are already shaping the future. Think more creatively and optimistically about what's possible in your future. Develop new strategies for creating a future that's better for everyone. Each course will feature stories and forecasts about important emerging technologies like virtual and augmented reality, artificial intelligence, robots, drones, blockchain, food innovation, genetics, and we'll look at global future forces like climate change, space exploration, and migration. The 5 courses in the specialization are Ready, Set, Future, Introduction to Futures Thinking, Forecasting Skills, how to see the future before it happens, Simulation Skills, this is your brain on the future, Collaborative Foresight, how to game the future, Urgent Optimism, how to turn foresight into action. These courses adapt the How to Think Like a Futurist workshops that I teach at Stanford University's Continuing Studies program. And they also include key lessons and tools from the Institute for the Future's Professional Certificate Program in Foresight Training. Taking these courses will prepare you to be a leader in futures thinking at work and in your community. And it will also help you start to make positive changes in your own life as you begin to see new possibilities more clearly and start to craft the personal future that you want. I want you to join me in this specialization because I know that futures thinking is the most important skill you can build next here on Coursera. Futures thinking is bigger than any single technology or work skill. The work of the future will require expertise in technologies that haven't been invented yet, platforms that haven't been created yet, and skills that nobody knows how to do yet today. So how do you prepare for a world that doesn't yet exist? Well, you can take inspiration from computer scientist and fellow futurist Alan Kay, who once famously said, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." This specialization will give you the skills to become someone who invents the future, someone who actively makes a better future instead of letting the future just happen to you. The specialization is for everyone. It requires no previous expertise or knowledge. So what are you waiting for? Welcome to the future. Welcome. I'm Jane McGonigal, your lead instructor for this course. I am so glad that you've decided to take this journey to build up your futures thinking skills. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and what you can expect from this course. I'm a research director at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, California. For over 50 years, the Institute has been helping ready the world for a better future. We're a nonprofit research and learning group, and our mission is to unleash the power of futures thinking for all. We work with everyone from Silicon Valley startups and the big tech companies to governments and global organizations like the United Nations and the World Bank. We work with leading retail companies, manufacturers, shipping companies, social impact organizations, basically anyone who wants to see what's coming faster so that they can prepare for disruptions and also think more creatively about what seems impossible today, but might actually become possible over the next decade. Now, I've been researching and inventing new futures thinking methodologies at the Institute for more than 10 years myself. I'm so excited to get to teach you some of those tools here in this course. I also created the How to Think Like a Futurist program for Stanford University's Continuing Studies School. And I've been teaching that in seminars and workshops on their campus for the past 3 years. And all of that is what you're going to learn in the Futures Thinking specialization here on Coursera. I know firsthand how powerful and life-changing future thinking skills can be. In my own work, futures thinking has given me strategic tools and the creativity to become an innovator in the gaming industry, where I actually use what I learned at the Institute to invent a whole new genre of gaming. I also have more confidence in my ability to shape my own personal future, to make bolder decisions about my life, to set bolder personal goals and rethink goals for my family. I just have so much more confidence and optimism in my ability to take control of my own future. And these are the gifts that I hope this course will bring to you. So get ready. You're going to meet lots of other professional futurists over the next 3 weeks, and you're going to learn the very first 3 tools that I learned when I walked in the doors at the Institute for the first time to start my training as a futurist. These tools changed how I think about everything, and that's what they're designed to do. In fact, the CEO of a client company of ours just recently said to us, "I can't unthink the way the Institute for the Future taught me to rethink everything." And that's what futures thinking can do for you. It will help unstick your mind, help you think new thoughts, invent new ideas, innovate new businesses, redesign your life, redesign the whole world around you, and put you in charge of your own future. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what is futures thinking exactly? Well, that's what you're going to find out in the next video. So I will see you there. Futures Thinking is a technology company trying to anticipate the long-term ethics and consequences of its new product. Will their tech be good for humanity in the long run, or will it harm society in hard-to-predict ways? Futures Thinking is a city government coming up with new ways to be resilient in the face of climate change. What kinds of new buildings and community services will it need to help people cope with extreme weather in the future? Futures Thinking is a venture capitalist investigating what kinds of companies to invest in. What new startups are most likely to have a positive impact on the planet and make a lot of money in the future? Futures Thinking is a university planning new kinds of courses, majors, and degrees to teach students the work skills of the future. What will graduates need to know today to be ready for the jobs of the future? Futures Thinking is an entrepreneur inventing a new service for a changing world. What kinds of help will people need in the future that no one else has created a way to provide yet? Futures Thinking is an artist looking to inspire others with visions of a future that are hopeful. What are the biggest changes we can imagine, and what would it feel like to live in that future? Futures Thinking is a food manufacturer exploring new trends in diet, health, and food technology. What new kinds of snacks and meals will people want to eat in the future? Futures Thinking is a group of scientists trying to figure out how to prevent the next deadly pandemic. How will people react to news of a dangerous virus in the future? And what innovative solutions will best prevent its spread? Futures Thinking is an organization helping refugees. Where are refugees more likely to come from in the future? And what new problems will they be escaping? What can we do now to help create safer, more supportive places for every person on this planet to seek a better life? Futures thinking is a CEO looking to lead their company into the future and to avoid being disrupted by new technologies or competitors. What should the company start doing differently to survive shifts and disruptions in the marketplace? Futures thinking is an activist trying to convince others to act together to solve an urgent challenge. How bad could things get in the future if we don't fight for change today? Futures thinking is a science fiction author writing news stories and op-eds from the future. What new problems will humans face in the future? What will we argue about? And how will we decide the best way forward? Futures thinking is a family deciding whether to move to a new country, and if so, which one? Where will the best economic opportunities be in the future? What places will be safest in the future? Futures thinking is you thinking about the life you want to lead, the changes you want to make, and the world you want to live in. What actions can you take today to prepare you to lead your best life and make the biggest positive impact on society?
Futures thinking teaches you how to forecast the future so you can be ready for anything.
Futures thinking helps you make sense of a world that's changing fast. New technologies, new laws, a new climate, and new behaviors. So if this is the new normal, how do we adapt?
Futures thinking is a way to imagine things that don't yet exist.
Futures thinking is really about looking at what seems very familiar and seeing it in an entirely new way.
Futures thinking, for me, is a safe zone. It's a place where I can actually take control and run with it.
Futures thinking is allowing yourself to be an artist and create new futures.
Futures thinking is a way to find your calling. What is it about the future that calls you and gives you a sense of meaning?
Futures thinking is a way to choose your life's adventure.
Futures thinking is strategic thinking.
Is creative thinking. Is thinking that change is possible.
Futures thinking is a way for me to solve the problems I see today by thinking about tomorrow.
Futures thinking skills are in demand. Our futurists here at the Institute work with top tech companies like Google, Cisco, Intel, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. They work with global organizations like the United Nations, the Red Cross, and the World Bank. And they work with leading social impact groups and philanthropists like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Skoll Foundation, and Salesforce.org. Futures thinking is a skill you can build and get better at by learning how professional futurists do it here at the Institute for the Future. So, what exactly is futures thinking? Well, let's try a little thought experiment. If I could tell you how you're going to die, what your exact cause of death will be, and I would be guaranteed to be right, would you want to know? Think about it. Most of us, it turns out, say no. We would not like to be able to predict our own deaths. Now, this has actually been studied by psychologists. A global study published last year by the American Psychological Association found that 87% of us said we don't want to know for sure anything about the future, whether it's big things like our cause of death or little things like whether our favorite sports team will win their next match, or other important things like if our current relationship will end in a split or a divorce. 12% of people say maybe there are a few things they'd like to know about the future, and only 1% of people worldwide say, yes, I would like to know absolutely everything I can about the future. Now, I'm a professional futurist, and you're here to learn how to think more effectively about the future. So what's the point of building these skills if nobody actually wants to know exactly what the future will be? Well, I have to tell you, as a professional futurist, I would never, ever, ever want to know exactly what will happen in the future, which may sound like a really weird thing for a futurist to say, but let me try to explain. If you're able to predict the future correctly, yes, you will look like a genius, but then you're stuck waiting for whatever future that you decided was most probable, most likely to happen. You're just stuck waiting for it to come to pass? And what if it's a future that you don't like? What if it's a future you don't want? Yes, it can help you feel smart to predict the future accurately, but it doesn't actually give you any power. It doesn't put you in control. It's much better to be able to decide what future you want and then to actively work to make that future real. And this brings us to the number one most important rule for professional futurists. And here it is. Never, ever, 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 ever try to predict the future, or at least never try to predict it correctly. We like to say at the Institute for the Future that we predict possibilities or plausibilities. The purpose is to expand your field of possibilities so that you can be ready for anything and so that you can think more creatively about what might happen in the years ahead. Another way to think about it is like this. In dealing with the future, it is far more important to be imaginative than to be right. This is a quote from Alvin Toffler, author of the 1960s book Future Shock, which is really a foundational text in the field of futures thinking, and you will find an excerpt from it in your recommended readings for this week's class. Now, Alvin Toffler's point and the point of futures thinking as we practice it at the Institute is to use the future as a space to rethink what's possible so that we're not shocked or blindsided by unexpected consequences, and more importantly, to give ourselves the freedom to invent new ways of doing things. The tools that you're going to learn in this course will really help stretch your imagination so you can see things that are otherwise really hard to see because they've never happened before. They've never existed yet. And if you're lucky, you can be one of the people who helps make these ideas real. But what do we mean by the future exactly? When does the future start? Does the future start tomorrow or next week? Is it a year from now or 10 years from now or 100 years from now? Well, that is what the next video is about. And trust me, this is not a trick question. There is actually an answer. If you are ready to find out, then I will see you in the next video. Welcome to your mini masterclass on the topic of why the future belongs to everyone. I'm here with Marina Gorbis, our Executive Director here at the Institute for the Future. Marina, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this masterclass with us. You've been professionally future forecasting for many years. You've been leading 20 years, wow. And you've been leading the Institute for the Future for more than a decade. And you've really been the visionary behind the Institute's mission to help bring futures thinking to the entire planet. Can you share a little bit of that mission and why it matters?
Yeah, I think there's two really important reasons why it's important for everybody to think about the future and learn the skills of future thinking. One is to help people imagine possibilities, imagine what the future might look like. And the second one is simply to make better choices, make better decisions. We're living in a pretty incredible time. Everything around us is changing. Our media, our technologies, how we work, how we learn, the climate around us is changing. And so it's an incredible time to make some choices about what do we want the future to be? What kind of future do we want to live in? And we don't want that to be decided by a few politicians or a few people, tech gurus in Silicon Valley. It's something that we need to all participate in because we don't want to be living in somebody else's future.
No, that's perfect. We don't want to live in someone else's future. We want to live in our future, the future we help make. But as we've seen in our research here at the Institute, most people don't have the time or interest or skills to think about the far future. Very few people do it. Most people are focused on the short term, the near term, and making decisions that benefit us in the short term. But you have recently been speaking quite a lot about why short-termism is a really serious challenge to overcome, both for individuals and society.
Yeah, and I understand that people need to make decisions right now and they need to make some choices today. But you make better choices if you put them in a larger context, if you can connect the future, the past, and the present. So to make better decisions, to make more resilient decisions, to make to be a more resilient human, what you need to understand is how do we get to this problem in the first place? What are the big forces that led us to today? And then think about how are these forces evolving in the future, so whatever choices you make today are connected to something bigger, because otherwise you're just going to be making these decisions randomly, and oftentimes you'll be making decisions that in the long term are not the best decisions. So there is this concept of temporal bandwidth, that to make more resilient, to make better decisions, you need to connect the past, the present, and the future. So oftentimes I think of myself as much as a futurist, but also as a historian, because it's really important to understand that past and connect it to the future. And luckily there's been a lot of studies showing that organizations that think about the future ultimately do better. They make better decisions. And just recently, the BBC, their headline was that short-termism is the greatest threat to humanity. And I agree.
It's interesting you mentioned that. We saw that there was a scientific paper that came out that showed that organizations that use future thinking practices really systematically, they have more profits, they grow faster, but even on an individual level, by being able to connect your past with your present, with your future, I think it helps us all feel like we have just a little more agency.
Yeah, we can place our decisions into some larger context, and I do think that it allows you to make better choices and make better decisions, more informed decisions. And after taking this course, this will become, I know it kind of may sound difficult, but it's a kind of practice you develop that as you go around and do things around the world in your life, you can see kind of signs of the future and you can connect it to your own decisions.
Well, that reminds me of something that you have famously said, which is that when it comes to the future, we are all immigrants to the future. How did you come up with that metaphor, and how does that help us get more comfortable with this whole future thinking process?
Sure. Well, I'm an immigrant myself, so this concept is very close to me. And when I first came to this country, and like all the immigrants, when you go into a new land, you have to kind of be open-minded. You have to learn a new language. You have to learn a new way of doing things. You have to observe. And that's kind of what the future is like. It maybe is a new land. It may seem foreign. It may be unfamiliar. But if you practice that immigrant mindset, which is you're open to new possibilities, you're looking at signals, you're connecting these things, then you become more native in that foreign land.
I love that. It makes it feel so much more kind of down to earth, that this is a kind of mindset that you bring to things that are strange and unfamiliar, whether it's a new place or a new time. You have written so much about the future, and our students are very lucky. They're going to be able to read an excerpt from your book, The Nature of the Future, and some of your essays as well. And I often, when I teach this class, I ask students what their most inspiring quote from all the readings they've done. And many of my students pick a quote from one of your essays, The Future is a Way of Life. And so I wanted to ask you about this quote and why you think it resonates with so many people. You wrote that the most wondrous thing about the future is that there are no facts about the future. No facts. So why do you think that inspires so many people?
It gives people a sense of something that they can create. It's not something that's given. It gives people a sense of agency, right? We have facts about the past. We have a lot of historical data and evidence. And I think that's important. As I said, the future is connected to the past. But it also doesn't mean that things will continue as they are. And a lot of times they change. And so there's a lot of agency in thinking that this is not something given. That's something that we can shape, we can create.
Yeah, and I guess if there are no facts, then you can't be wrong yet.
Exactly. Everybody is right.
Yeah, right in the sense that something might be possible. And maybe if there is a change we're hoping is possible, or an invention that we believe is urgently needed, that as long as there are no facts telling us that it's not possible or that it can't be done, we can still play a part.
Yeah, and I think it empowers people to think about it. Okay, if I want that kind of future, what do I need to do to get there?
Yes, and that comes right back to our foresight, insight, action cycle, where all of this is for the purpose of taking action today. Well, this is great. Thank you so much for bringing these words of wisdom to our students. Any last advice to our students as they continue on this journey of becoming future thinkers?
I guess my advice is also to have fun. It's a wondrous experience to be, and it's kind of a great luxury to be able to think about the future and to get that sense that you can participate in building that future. So just have fun, enjoy it, learn a lot in the process, and also create community of others. Don't just keep it to yourself. The best kind of future thinking is when you participate with other people and you talk about it with other people.
Well, speaking of which, we're going to be inviting you to join us in our Coursera community on the discussion forums. Hope you'll jump in and give some reaction and feedback to our students.
Would love to. Look forward to it.
Oh, well, thank you, Marina. And I will see all of you on our discussion forums to talk about this masterclass and everything else we've covered in this course. When you think about the future, how far out are you thinking? As we just saw, there are so many good answers to this question. And actually, scientists have figured out that there's a reason why different people give such wildly different answers to the question, when does the future start? It turns out that different people's brains are wired differently, that the clocks in our brains work in different ways so that we actually experience the passage of time differently. Now, there's no better or worse way to experience the passage of time, but professional futurists have figured out that when it comes to innovation, to social change, to strategic planning, to creativity, there is actually one really, really good answer to the question, when does the future start? And if you can fine-tune your brain to think about the future at this specific time scale, you will get the most benefits. And here it is. The future starts 10 years from today. So if it's the year 2019, futurists will focus on how things might be in the year 2029. And in the year 2020, we'll start thinking about the year 2030, and so on. Now, this might seem like a very specific answer and maybe kind of random. I mean, why 10 years and not 3 or 5 or 20? Well, there are actually a couple really important reasons. The first has to do with something called mental flexibility. That's your ability to consider new ideas and new possibilities. And this has actually been studied by psychologists and business schools, that most of us can have mental flexibility when it comes to thinking 10 years in the future. But most of us, when we think about 1 year or 3 years or even 5 years from now, we tend to get kind of tripped up and stuck on the realities of the present day. But 10 years is long enough for us to believe that things really can be different. And this is crucial because futurist thinking is all about recognizing the forces of change and helping to shape them. Why else is 10 years a kind of magic time frame? Well, 10 years is long enough to actually step up and do something. It gives you enough time, enough runway to really have an idea or a new business or new technology achieve liftoff. For example, in 10 years, you can build and scale a new business from scratch to go global. Facebook took 10 years to go from 1 user to 1 billion users. 10 years is also long enough to have a new technology achieve widespread adoption. It took 10 years for this planet to go from just a few million cell phones connected to the internet to 5 billion cell phones connected to the internet. Or think about technology like cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin. It took 10 years to go from Bitcoin being an idea talked about in a scientific paper to achieving a market cap of over $300 billion. 10 years is a magic timescale for social change too. For example, in the United States, it took 10 years from the initial formation of the civil rights movement against racial segregation to successfully achieve the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Or consider same-sex marriage. It's taken 10 years from the first country that passed and legalized same-sex marriage for it to become legal in 31 countries and to become supported by a majority of citizens in a majority of countries on this planet. So things that seem impossible or improbable in 10 years, they can really change. And in your personal life, 10 years is enough time to accomplish almost anything. In 10 years, you can earn an advanced degree. You can raise a kid from a toddler to a teenager. You can become one of the world's leading experts on a topic that doesn't even exist yet today. That you can do in 10 years. So now you know why, during the rest of this course and the entire Futures Thinking specialization, we'll be talking a lot about 10-year forecasts and 10-year scenarios and 10-year strategies. It's the magic window for really changing and shaping the future. Surprisingly, however, most people do not take advantage of this magic window. Last year, I had the chance to conduct the largest survey on futures thinking ever conducted, and here's what I learned. We asked people, how often do you think about something that might happen or something you personally might do at least 10 years from the present? And we said that imagination, planning, researching, reading, talking to others, or even just daydreaming all count. And what we learned is that more than half of people worldwide think about the 10-year future once a year or less. In fact, a third of people say they rarely or never try to imagine 10 years in the future. The good news is, by the time you're done with this course, you will be in the top 10% of future thinkers globally because you'll be thinking about that magic 10-year timescale almost daily. I should mention, it does not take a decade for you to start to see and experience the impacts of futures thinking in your everyday life. You'll actually start to reap benefits immediately with results like increased creativity, a smarter kind of empathy, and more hope and optimism for the future. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at all of the proven, measurable benefits of futures thinking and how they start to pay off immediately in the present. Futures thinking is fun and fascinating, but it's more than just that. I've had the chance over the past decade to study and observe the impact of futures thinking on individuals and organizations, and here's what we know. When practiced often, the kinds of formal thinking methods that you're learning in this course and in the entire futures thinking specialization, they can help you build 7 key strengths. Creativity. You transcend traditional ideas and invent new possibilities. You can imagine things that don't exist today or have never happened before. Foresight. You anticipate hard-to-see possibilities that others can't or won't see. You don't get blindsided by the future. You see it coming. Mental flexibility. You accept that things can be different than they are now, that virtually anything can change. This is the opposite of having a fixed or a stuck mindset. Empathy. You have a strong awareness of the hopes and fears of others. You pay close attention to how any future could affect different groups of people and communities differently. With this kind of empathy, you can work for more sustainable, equitable futures that benefit everyone. Practical skepticism. You apply critical thinking to claims about what's possible or likely. You don't buy into the hype. You have a clearer sense of what's realistic and probable when. Strategy. You become a master at setting clear goals, determining a course of action, and connecting the dots from the present to your preferred future. Hope. You're confident that the actions you take today can potentially make a big impact on how your own future and the futures of others turn out. There's actually scientific literature that documents these benefits, and I will link to some of these studies for you in this week's recommended readings in case you're a science geek like me and you actually want to dig into the research for yourself. But one of the studies I want to tell you about now. This was a study published last year, and it looked at the long-term business and economic impacts of futures thinking. This study followed just under 100 companies over a 7-year period. The companies ranged from brand new startups to established Fortune 500 companies. And the researchers analyzed how many futures thinking practices were used regularly by the companies, the same kind of practices that you're learning in this specialization. And then they followed the companies for 7 years to see if by the time the future actually came to pass, if all that future thinking had paid off. And here's what they discovered. Futures thinking companies outperformed the average company with 33% more profits. And futures thinking companies outperformed the average company with 200% more growth. By these two measures, futures thinking is an incredibly useful and financially rewarding skill. It's no wonder so many innovative startups and big companies are actually hiring full-time futurists and building their own internal futures thinking teams to do this kind of work on a daily basis. But finally, it's not just science that says that futures thinking has real important benefits. We hear often from people that we train at the Institute for the Future about the impacts that it's had on their lives and their careers, and their stories can really help put these benefits in perspective. So here's what some of your fellow future thinkers have said after they completed the same future thinking specialization when we taught it at Stanford University's continuing studies.
As a result of the class, my mindset on the future has become more positive, and the future doesn't seem so far off. Before the class, 10 years in the future seemed like an eternity. Now the future seems less nebulous and unknown. I find myself reading news for signals and forecasting possible futures. Most importantly, I think about what my small role in helping realize those possible futures might be.
Taking this class has brought me hope for the future, for my family and myself. I've learned to understand how the present can give us a preview on what the future will look like. I've found myself planning how I can participate in the betterment of the future. I've become more appreciative of innovations, more inspired to live life, and more excited about what the future could be. Becoming more imaginative, creative, and thoughtful will be very useful with my job as a software developer.
From time to time, I have a stopping moment in my life where I evaluate everything, what I am doing and why I am doing it, and should I continue doing it or do something else, and think about my future plans. One of these moments was when I signed up for this class. The experience and knowledge that I've gained is outstanding, and I was really inspired and impressed by the challenges I had in the class. It was a good stopping point in my life where I started to evaluate myself. I needed this, and now I will continue thinking in a different perspective as I got truly inspired.
Having taken this class will remind me to not stop thinking how things could be done differently. Thinking about the future innovations I want to help create makes me very excited. I can't wait to live in this future.
I was very excited when I finished this class. Not only was it fun and engaging, but it helped me figure out what I am going to devote myself to in the next 10 to 20 years. I think the class has equipped me with the right framework and tools that help me to drill down to a specific project that I can take real actions on, both at a personal level and at the societal level. My imagination seemed to be opened up and stimulated in a scientific way.
As I've gotten better at thinking about the future, I'm not feeling so overwhelmed, or that I'm just along for the ride, and that whatever will come my way is completely out of my control. I've shifted towards a mindset that gives me the ability to effect change and decide my own future.
Taking this class, I've gotten better at thinking more creatively. I think my creativity had died down a little bit, so the future tools were nice to get that machinery working again. Also, I think before I took this class, I was a little lost. And now it seems like all these doors that I never noticed just opened up. Or were always open in the first place, but I never noticed until now. I feel more hopeful and more motivated to do things. Thank you.
I trust and believe that you will have the same kind of transformative experience if you finish this specialization. So stick with it.
I'm interested in the future of entertainment.
I'm researching the future of learning.
I'm interested in the future of religion and spirituality.
I'm fascinated about the future of dating.
I'm interested in the future of reporting and journalism.
I'm passionate about the future of migration.
I'm deeply curious about the future of media.
I'm interested in the future of our oceans.
The future of travel.
The future of jobs.
The future of politics.
The future of sports.
The future of meat.
The future of health.
The future of human rights. The future of capitalism.
That's a lot of different futures, and hopefully it gives you an idea of just how many different ways there are for you to shape and investigate the future. We all have our own favorite topics and ideas and issues and technologies and global challenges, and so we get to customize and curate our set of favorite future topics. Now, there is no limit to how many futures you get to shape and explore, but during the specialization, it will be helpful for you to pick just a few different futures to really focus on so that you can build up your expertise. For example, some of the futures that I'm really excited about researching and shaping right now are the future of mental health care, the future of running, the future of gaming and virtual reality, and the future of learning. And interestingly, these futures actually intersect and play together in really surprising ways. And you may find that if you pick at least 2 different futures to investigate, that you will discover some strange and wonderful intersections and some unusual opportunities that might otherwise be hard to find. Where do you want to be a force for change? This is the Future of X assignment, and X can be anything that you want. So join us on the discussion board and share with us the futures that you've chosen to become an expert on. As you complete assignments over the rest of this specialization, you'll be asked to work with these futures. Pick any 2 topics you're interested in. You don't have to be an expert on them yet, just passionate about becoming one. Welcome back. This week, you're going to learn how to work with the basic building block of all futures thinking, the signal. Signals are to futurists what words are to writers, or paint is to painters, or food is to chefs, or computer code is to programmers. Signals are the basic medium that futurists work in. Signals are what we build new things out of. And personally, I like to think of signals as a kind of tool for helping us see in the dark. Let me show you what I mean. The late, great British author Virginia Woolf once wrote, "The future is dark, which is the best thing the future can be, I think." She didn't mean dark as in depressing or full of terrible things. She meant dark as in unseeable, unknowable. And I agree. A dark, unseeable future is a wonderful gift, because if we can't see exactly what the future will be, then we can still change it, shape it, make it whatever we can imagine. But if we want to shape the future, we have to be able to grab onto something, right? We can't just be blindly waving our hands in the dark. And for futurists, the thing that we grab onto, that thing that we try to shape and mold, almost like a kind of modeling clay, that is a signal. So let me give you an example of a signal, and then we'll look at some definitions. I was at a local park the other day, and I saw this sign, "No Drone Zone." It was the first time I'd ever seen a sign like this. It caught my attention. It made me say, that's new, that's kind of weird, and it made me wonder, what's behind the sign? What's behind this rule? So I started to think about it. Is this a noise issue, or maybe something about wanting to go to a park and look up and see blue skies? And I started to imagine what the future might be like if the skies were full of drones, constantly buzzing in the background and obscuring our view of the clouds. Then I wondered, well, maybe it's a safety issue. There have been recent instances of attacks using drones. For example, the Venezuelan president was attacked during a public speech at a military parade by a drone. Then I started to wonder, well, how are they going to enforce this rule? Because drones are long distance objects, and recently when there was an airport in London that was closed because there was reporting of drones being sighted that might interfere with the aircraft, nobody could figure out who was flying the drones or where they'd come from. So how exactly are we going to enforce a rule like this and ticket them or penalize them? I also started to wonder, what about police use of drones? Because that's increasingly popular. I'm starting to see a lot of news stories about police putting cameras on drones and flying them to reported crime scenes to take pictures before police can actually get there. And will a no drone zone be open to police drones, but not everybody else? And what all of these ideas and questions started to form into is the realization that we are entering into a really messy and unknown period, a world where there are lots of drones, and we're still figuring out what we want that world to look like. We're still figuring out privacy concerns, we're figuring out safety concerns, quality of life and mental health concerns, and that's what made this sign a signal to me about the future. It made me stop and become aware of a change that's underway, and it helped me think through what the realities of that change might be. Now that you have an example of a signal, let's talk definitions. The first definition of a signal comes from our executive director here at the Institute, Marina Gorbis. She says a signal is a specific example of the future in the present. And this points to a really important aspect of signals. They are real and concrete. They already exist. You can go look at them, you can experience them, you can talk to them. These are things that are already happening. They exist now, they are real. The second definition that we use a lot to talk about signals comes from the science fiction writer William Gibson. And he famously said, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." This points to another important aspect of signals. They're interesting because they point to a future where they might become more distributed. They might be more commonplace and widespread. And what makes signals interesting is they're just like the tip of the iceberg. As we start to imagine how the future might unfold and what the world might be like, signals are like a little tip of people experimenting with new things, and they can help us imagine what would the world be like if they were evenly distributed. And the last definition comes from me. I like to say that a signal is a clue that things might soon become different, and different how. That's the really fun and fascinating part of signals. They make us stop and say, huh, or aha, because they're showing us some kind of a change, some kind of a shift, some kind of a disruption. And that's my favorite aspect of signals to play with, to try to figure out what is that nature of change, what's the direction of change, what's the cause for change. And by looking at that direction of change, we get a much clearer picture of where we're all going. Now, signals are often a new technology or a new scientific breakthrough, but they don't have to be. Signals can also be a new business model. It could be a government project. It could be a change in demographics. It could even just be some weird behavior that people are doing that we've never seen them do before. Oftentimes, signals are new laws or policies or regulations, and we're going to, in the next video, look at all of these different types of signals, and then we're going to talk about the really fun part, which is what do you do with a signal once you catch one? Let's talk signals. Here at the Institute for the Future, we have a database for collecting signals. And we're also constantly emailing each other with links to signals and asking each other, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think it means? Let's take a look at some of the signals that we've all been talking about lately. Signal number 1. China is sending teens to a simulated Mars colony. In the Chinese city of Mangai, the climate and landscape is one of the most Mars-like places on Earth. That makes it the perfect setting for a newly opened Mars simulation base that China hopes will draw tourists and maybe even help humanity reach the real planet Mars. Visitors to the base will have a chance to immerse themselves in the environment and try to solve problems that they might face on the real Mars, such as planting potatoes on Mars for food supply and solar power generation. If the base can provide researchers with an approximation of Mars for their experiments, while also getting the public, and young people in particular, excited about space exploration, it could have a positive role to play in shaping humanity's spacefaring future. As a futurist, this signal makes me think, are we moving from a world in which kids grow up expecting to live on Earth the whole lives, to now having the first generation of young people that can realistically expect the opportunity to live on another planet? And it makes me wonder, what will the psychological impacts be on that generation? Signal number 2. 5G connected smart collars let cows choose when they want to be milked by robots. On traditional farms, cows get milked whenever the farmer decides to milk them. But on this new farm in the United Kingdom, the cows are in charge. Here we have 50 cows wearing Wi-Fi connected smart collars that link up to a robotic milking system. When a cow wants to be milked, it heads to the robot. The robot knows which cow is which, and it can adjust itself to latch perfectly onto each individual cow's teats for milking. The system gives the cow a treat to munch on, and the just-in-time milking saves the cows on this farm from experiencing the pain and possible infection that can follow a delay in milking. The technology company Cisco is leading this pilot program to explore how 5G internet can transform the future of agriculture and farming. As a futurist, this signal makes me think, are we moving from a world in which humans make the decisions for all the species we raise and farm and keep as pets, to a world in which animals are empowered by robots and by the internet to express their own desires and meet their own needs? It makes me wonder, will this be a more humane future for animals, or are there downsides to hooking animals up to the internet? What will surprise us about this future? Signal number 3. Zapping elderly people's brains supercharges their working memory. Here's some breakthrough science. New research shows that stimulating the brains of elderly people with electrical currents allows them to perform just as well on a memory test as people in their 20s. It's being hailed as a sign that researchers may have found a non-invasive way to turn back the hands of time when it comes to human memory. The research compared subjects in their 70s who have already experienced significant declines in their cognitive abilities with subjects in their 20s, when the older adults received 25 minutes of mild stimulation delivered through scalp electrodes and personalized to their individual brain circuits. The difference in the working memory between the two groups vanished. The memory boost lasted for a full hour, the point at which the experiment ended. It's possible the boost lasts even longer. The research team behind this study hopes their discovery will one day lead to a treatment for the millions of people around the world living with cognitive impairments, particularly those with Alzheimer's disease. As a futurist, this makes me think, are we moving from a world in which we inevitably lose cognitive ability as we age, to a world in which we can experience, at least for a few hours a day, the same mental clarity and abilities we had in our youth? It makes me wonder how we will use this technology, not just for people with impaired memory, but maybe also to improve student performance in school or exams, or at workplaces. Is this a future we want? Signal number 4. A new California state law bans bots from pretending to be human. Are you talking to a real person online or a bot? In California, you have a better chance of knowing the truth because bots will need to identify themselves thanks to a new bill just signed into law. The law bans automated accounts from pretending to be real people in order to incentivize a purchase or sale of goods or services in a commercial transaction, or to influence a vote in an election. Automated accounts will still be able to interact with users, but they will have to disclose that they are not, in fact, humans. As a futurist, this makes me think, are we moving from a world in which, for very good reason, we have more and more anxiety about whether anything we encounter online is true or fake, to a world in which we will start to see smart laws prohibit and prevent deceptive technology, so we can have more confidence that our online interactions are real and authentic. It makes me wonder, what other laws will we need in the future to deal with the ethical risks of bots and AI? Signal number 5. Streaming music consumption has massive environmental costs, more than any other point in music history. New research shows that while the cost of listening to new music has gone down for consumers over the past few decades, the environmental impacts have gone up. According to the study, the global transition towards streaming recorded music from internet-connected devices has resulted in significantly higher carbon emissions than at any previous point in the history of music. That's because storing and processing music online uses a tremendous amount of resources and energy, even more than the production of plastics previously used to make vinyl records, or the manufacturing and distribution of CDs. Today, streaming music generates more than twice as many greenhouse gas equivalents as CDs did 20 years ago. The researchers point out that even when it seems like we're creating less of an environmental impact by switching from real physical products to digital ones, the harder to see impacts are important to measure and reduce. As a futurist, this signal makes me think, what other environmental impacts are we underestimating? Are we moving from a world in which we just don't know to a world in which maybe we can have better data about hard-to-see environmental impacts so that we can transform all of our industries and manufacturing more effectively as a result? Signal number 6. The United Nations just unveiled a design for a new floating city that can withstand Category 5 hurricanes. How can humans survive whatever extreme weather and climate change we face over the next century? The United Nations wants to test their design for floating cities that they hope will make humanity more resilient. The city they've designed would be made up of a collection of hexagonal platforms anchored to the ocean floor. Each platform can hold around 300 people. A group of 6 connected platforms make up a village. 6 connected villages add up to a city, which would support a total of around 10,000 residents. The villages would be anchored within a mile of major coastal cities. The platforms could also be towed to safer locations in the event of a disaster. All of the buildings would be constructed out of sustainable materials like timber and bamboo. The UN Habitat's executive director said the agency plans to work with Oceanics, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the Explorers Club to build a city prototype docked on the East River near the UN's headquarters in New York this year. As a futurist, this signal makes me think, are we moving from a world in which humans adapt to the surface of the earth and live wherever land happens to be, to a world in which we are constantly redesigning the surface of the earth and create new lands wherever we want? And it makes me wonder, who will govern these new floating cities? And are they a chance to experiment with new kinds of governments, maybe even open borders and open citizenship? Now you're getting the hang of this. You're figuring out what makes a good signal. So what do you do with a signal when you catch one? Well, look, the most important thing about signals is that they help make sure that the future doesn't sneak up on you, that you don't go into a kind of future shock where you don't see it coming and you can't adapt to change fast enough. With signals, you see it coming. You have time to prepare, to adapt, to change strategy, or to push the future in a different direction if you don't like where it's going. So if you do nothing else but track signals and keep exposing yourself constantly to new signals of change, you will have created a really incredible advantage for yourself, professionally and personally. The next step with signals is to analyze them, to process the clues to get a clearer picture of intriguing future possibilities. In the next video, I will teach you the 4 key questions that we ask about every signal we encounter.
Welcome to 5 Minutes in the Future with Sarah Smith. Sarah, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Max. Thanks.
Hey. So tell us, what futures are you focused on right now?
So I focus mostly on the future of food. And recently, I've been thinking a lot about the intersection between the future of food and the future of climate change.
Okay, seems like an urgent future, climate, food. What excites you? What's new? What's interesting? What should we be focusing on?
So in particular, I've been looking for signals of change about the way that people are already starting to adapt their food practices, what they eat, how they grow food, based on how the climate is changing. There are already places in the world that are experiencing more droughts, more floods, more extreme weather because of climate change, and we can learn a lot about what people are doing with their food in those places.
So in the geographies where people are already facing climate disruption, what are people doing to deal with that?
So actually there's an amazing cookbook that documents some of this, and it's a project called Adaptive Farms Resilient Tables that the United Nations Development Program put out recently. And it looks at 6 countries all over the world that are already experiencing disruptions from climate change. And then it documents stories and recipes and ways that they are changing some of their traditional food practices in order to be more resilient in the face of those changes.
Can you give us an example of a new type of resilient farm or a new type of recipe?
Sure. So one of the recipes featured in the book, or an ingredient that actually comes up a lot in the cookbook, is millet. And specifically, this is looking at some areas in Niger and Sudan where they're experiencing more drought, not as much rainfall as there used to be. And millet is a grain that used to be grown much more commonly. And now they are kind of bringing it back and trying to grow it more because it just does so much better in drought situations than, say, something like wheat or maybe corn would do.
When you see the signal of change and you think 10 years into the future, what might become more common?
So I think the kind of unfortunate or a scary thing that will become more common is more disruptions to our food system, to our agriculture because of climate change. And so then maybe the positive side of that is that what's also becoming more common is more ways to adapt to that. When it comes to food, people want to be able to keep eating the foods that they've always eaten and they've always loved. And so we're seeing a lot of really amazing creative efforts to ensure that we can still enjoy food even in a changing climate.
That sounds delicious. What might become less common? So we want to enjoy the food that we know and love. We might be able to continue to do so in new ways. What might not we be able to do in the future?
One scenario is that we won't be able to expect to eat the foods that are always available, always abundant. When we go to the grocery store and there's every possible food you can imagine on the shelf, that might not be as possible in the future as climate change disrupts when and where we can grow food and how far we think it's appropriate to ship food to get it to our grocery stores. So one thing that I think this cookbook kind of points to is the ways that we might need to start adapting or changing our eating practices, really based a little bit more on where we live.
Amazing. This is both a unique opportunity for the future and some unique challenges. When we think about what becomes more common, what becomes less common, and we think about these signals of change, this cookbook, what do you think emerges that's new? What new type of possibility becomes potentially real over the next 10 years?
The biggest possibility that I see coming out of this is really more of a focus on biodiversity. So that's promoting the variety and different types of species of fruits and vegetables and grains and nuts and everything that we want to eat, but trying to grow more of them, grow a more diverse selection of them. And it turns out that that also is more resilient in the face of climate change. And so what I think that this cookbook points to is possibilities for how everyday people might start adapting their practices, how you might choose different recipes or choose different ingredients at the grocery store. But if we kind of zoom out to think about the bigger food system, it also suggests how food companies might start changing the ingredients that they use in their food products so that those also support biodiversity and support a more resilient, climate-ready food system.
I can't wait to design new recipes with you.
Let's go make some food.
Thanks, Sarah. So this has been 5 Minutes in the Future. See you next time. Welcome to 5 Minutes in the Future with Catherine Haynes. Hi, Catherine.
Hey, Max, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks. I'm so glad that you're here with us.
So am I.
So tell us, you look out into the future, you are really, really fully immersed in foresight. What futures do you care about most?
I care about the future impact of inequity.
Okay, so that seems like an urgent future.
It's an urgent future.
And one that is well worth our time today. So let's talk about the future of inequity. As you look around the world, tell us, what is an interesting, unique, or provocative signal of change that you've seen recently?
There is a very neat homeless encampment in South Berkeley, California that has solar panels installed there, providing energy to all of the tents in the encampment.
Whoa, okay. Solar panels embedded into a homeless encampment that seems, is it permanently there? Are they mobile? Tell us more about this.
It's mobile. It can be moved. If that encampment were evicted, those solar panels could move and the encampment in its entirety could go to a different location.
Did the city provide these? How did this come to be?
There was a person who was living in the homeless encampment who worked together with the community to get the solar panels donated by a private citizen.
Okay, so it was a sort of bottom-up evolution of an energy grid that's 100% renewable,
right,
embedded into a homeless camp.
Right.
Very provocative signal. Tell me, as we look out 1 decade into the future, what does this signal of change point to? What might it mean for our future?
I think what it means for the future is it assumes that even for people with very low resources, they must have a right to energy, to communications technology, meaning computers and telephones. That's what primarily, and there's light obviously, but the huge, I think, the huge change is we assume that they must have telephone access, personal telephone access, and access to the internet.
So this is a future where the internet becomes a fundamental human right, maybe on par with food, water, shelter.
Right.
When we imagine that future and we think of the internet as a human right, how might that actually play out over the next 10 years if we fully adopt this ethos?
I think that underlying this is this assumption that we'll have a portable power source controlled by the people who use the power that enables them to communicate. And that's sort of an undermining or an ambushing of authority, of the ability to create your own community, create your own connections in the world. That is, it's part of a trend that we've seen, but it's a democratization of that ability. And it doesn't take a ton of resources to do that. It takes collaboration, and it takes the kind of social capital that connects you to people who can help you do that.
Okay, so we are in this possible future where we have a sort of distributed renewable energy grid embedded into all different types of transient or mobile communities who are otherwise resource poor. What do you think might become more common over the next 10 years as that scales?
As it scales beyond, sometimes innovation starts in low resource settings. And so I can see that the same technology, the same approach of collectively creating this communications capacity can be adopted by communities who want to live off the grid, outside of the grid, who want independence from the powers that be. And it gives a kind of flexibility in life, a kind of ownership and self-determination that I think will not be limited to only the people who have wealth, but can span the social spectrum in a way that can be quite powerful, particularly if we think now strategically about where we need to accelerate the adoption of this collective power. And we can do it now. We've seen this happen in the context of a homeless encampment. We can do it in lower economic communities in our own backyard. So we can be activists. We can be part of a movement that creates this, that accelerates this democratization of access to communication technology and to power, to energy.
So we can help enable, embolden, and empower communities around the world through our own efforts in the present.
That's right.
I love that. It's a really wonderful way to conclude this 5 minutes in the future. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
See you next time.
Now that you know what a signal is, what do you do with these clues to the future? How do you interpret them? Well, here's a true story. Recently, one of my colleagues at the Institute sent an email link to an interesting signal to the entire staff at the Institute with the following message. I think there's something future-y about it, but I haven't figured out what it is yet. This is how most professional futurists feel about any new signal we encounter. It grabs our attention, but then we have to sit with it. We have to chew on it, let it stew, and kind of figure out what it all means. So when we find a signal that we're intrigued by, we have this series of 4 questions that we can ask right away to help us tease out that meaning and get a little bit more insight about what it all means. And in this video, I'm going to show you these 4 questions, and then you're going to get a chance to practice asking these questions about a particularly fascinating signal that I'm kind of obsessed with right now. So if you're ready to learn the questions and ask them, let's go. The best way to learn how to ask the 4 questions is to ask them about a specific signal. So I'd like to share with you the most important signal I've ever found. It was actually the very first signal I found 18 years ago. And so you can think of this as not only a demonstration of how to ask the 4 questions about a signal, but also as a story about how finding one teeny tiny signal can actually change the whole course of your career or your life. 18 years ago, I came across something really weird. I just finished playing an online game called the AI Web Game, and this was a special kind of game. I was on a team with over 40,000 people, all collaborating and cooperating together to solve one big mystery. And this game was really the first game to try to take advantage of the collective intelligence aspects of the internet. I mean, remember, this was the year 2001. And the weird thing that I noticed was that after the game was over, a bunch of people from our 40,000 person team came back to the discussion boards online and started talking about how they wanted to try to use the collective intelligence skills that they'd built up during the game to try to solve real-world problems. And they had all kinds of ideas for how they could do this. They were thinking about maybe they could investigate government corruption, or they could try to solve cold case mysteries, or maybe ferret out terrorist networks online. They had all these ideas and they weren't sure if they could do it, but they had this feeling that they had built up some real skills and they wanted to transfer these skills to do some real world good. And this really caught my attention. I was intrigued by it. I'd never seen anything like this before, and it made me stop and wonder, what if this isn't a crazy idea? What if they're right? What if the hundreds of millions of gamers could find ways to connect those gaming skills to help solve global challenges? And I decided to investigate this, and I actually wound up dedicating my whole PhD to studying this question of, could gamers actually solve real-world problems? I didn't know I would do that at the time. I just had this weird signal. So let's walk through the 4 questions about a signal, about this particular signal, and we can see how they work. Question number 1, what kind of change does this represent? From what to what? This is the from X to Y method of defining a direction of change or defining the nature of change. In the case of the collective detectives trying to use their game skills to solve real-world problems, I would say that the direction of change was from looking at games as a way to escape the real world to a world where games can impact the real world. And this is actually a pretty interesting shift. Question number 2, what's driving this change? What's the future force behind it? This question is about figuring out what might give this signal momentum, what might make it get bigger and more popular and more distributed. In the case of these gamers, I think the future force driving the shift was the human desire to make a difference, to have a positive impact on society. This is a really deep-seated desire that most people have, and it seemed to me like it's so common and so essential to our humanity that it might actually be a really powerful driving force. Question number 3, what will the world be like in 10 years, that magic timescale, if this signal gets amplified, if it becomes common and widespread? This is where you really get to play with your imagination. I started to imagine a world where the hundreds of millions of gamers wake up every day and they log into their computers or their game consoles and they're given a puzzle to solve or a question to answer or a mystery to investigate, but they're real. And I started to think about all of that human power and creativity adding up to something bigger. And finally, question number 4. Is this possible future a future that we want? Does this signal seem to suggest a world that's getting better or worse? Do we feel excited by it or alarmed by it, and why? Now for me, this was a really exciting future, and I threw all of my weight behind it. I did my PhD research on the question. I started making and prototyping games to try to connect gamers with real-world problems. And I'm happy to say that 18 years later, we're actually living in part of this future that I imagined. There are hundreds of different games that today can connect gamers to real problems, whether they're helping neuroscientists map the neurons in the brain, or they're helping medicine come up with new cures for diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's. There are games for players to diagnose malaria, helping doctors in the field on their phones. There are games to actually investigate government corruption, just like those gamers imagined way back in 2001. And for me, thinking about, was this the future I want, that gave me the motivation and drive to actually make it real. And as you start to look at signals, you'll get a sense for which signals really call out to you and say, this is the path that I want to continue on. Let's try these questions together with another signal, or actually 3 signals that go together as a kind of set. First signal, Google recently filed a patent for a smart bathroom. So Google wants to put sensors in your toilet, in your bathtub, in your scale, in your mirror. File that signal away and let's add to it another signal. What would these sensors be able to do? Well, let's look at an existing technology, a smart toilet. What might Google learn by having a sensor in your bathroom? Well, smart toilets already exist. There are more than 1 million of them on the planet, and here's what they can detect: drug and alcohol use, pregnancy, any medications that you might be taking or not taking even though you should. They can detect stress hormones, so they know a little bit about your mental health and well-being, and they can also detect infectious diseases. Okay, so file that signal away and let's add one more to our set. Intel, the tech company, recently completed a market survey looking at whether people would put smart toilets in their home. And they found out that 70% of people would say they would welcome a smart toilet in their home and actually share that data with another company if it would lead to lower healthcare costs. Okay, so 70% of people would share their bathroom data for lower healthcare costs. We've got 3 signals now. Let's think about them all together and ask those 4 questions. This is actually your assignment for this week, to answer these 4 questions. Number 1, what kind of change does this represent? From what to what? Number 2, what's driving this change? What's the future force behind it? Number 3, what will the world be like in 10 years if this signal, if smart toilets, where we share our data with others, gets amplified, becomes common and widespread? Where else could you see smart toilets? And finally, is this a future you want? There's no right or wrong answer to this question, but imagine yourself in a world of smart toilets. Would you use them? Why or why not? I can't wait to see your answer to this assignment. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that quick trip to the future. In this video, we're going to go over some frequently asked questions about signals, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull up some of the most popular questions that I typically get from students. So here's the questions that we're going to cover. Where do I find signals? How do I keep track of them? If I only do one thing with a signal, what should it be? And how do I know if it's really a signal? Let's tackle these one at a time. Okay, first of all, the most important one, where do I look for signals? I cannot overstate the importance of the one technique that I use literally every day, which is simply to do a Google search for the future of X, where the future of X is anything that I'm interested about. You will find videos, you will find blog posts, you will find podcasts, you will find news articles, you will find scientific papers. Just Google it. And this is a way that I practice every single day, collecting one new signal and learning something interesting. Now, in addition to doing the Google search, there are other places you can regularly find really interesting signals. There are news sites that specialize in publishing really current, groundbreaking scientific discoveries and technological breakthroughs, and they do it in a really accessible way. The two sites that I highly recommend are Science Daily and Medical Express. Those are the two that I turn to most often. It's also a really good idea to follow startup company news and investments in new companies. So if you're interested in this space, you can of course follow TechCrunch, and maybe a little bit less known, a site called GeekWire. There are also great newsletters that just regularly every day publish signals about the future. The daily one that I use most often is with a site called futurism.com. One good trick is to follow futurists on social media. So here's something you can try right now. Just go to the Twitter search bar and type in futurist and then filter the results for people, and you will find thousands of verified people on Twitter to follow who are professional futurists, and that's a great way to just get signals in your feed every day. Oh, and the last thing to do to find a signal, which is fun and really helps everybody learn together, is just to ask people, what's the weirdest thing you've seen lately? Or what's something new that's caught your eye? You can put this in a post on social media or email your colleagues or make this a conversation starter for a meeting. And this will help you collect signals that are not just on your radar, but take advantage of the diversity of points of views and interests from the people around you. So the next FAQ is, how do you keep track of all of these signals? Well, at the Institute, we have a database, but you don't have to be so formal about it. I know a lot of people use a spreadsheet to keep track of them, or they just use bookmarks in their browser. My personal favorite cheat sheet technique is that whenever I find an interesting signal, I write an email to myself with the word signal in the subject. And whenever I'm trying to remind myself of all the cool things I found, I just search my email for emails that have signal in the subject. You can also set Google News alerts for a signal that you found so that you can get an update on it. So if there was a new technology or a new company or a new project or a new law that you're interested in, just set a Google News search alert for it, and then you will get updates. And this is actually really important to circle back and keep following up on signals, because sometimes a promising startup will shut down or a policy will get repealed. Just this week, a lot of us at the Institute were excited about a signal of a bunch of Chinese astronauts growing a plant on the moon for the first time. It was really amazing. And then the next day, we found out that the plant had died. So you gotta circle back to that signal and make sure you're keeping track of where it goes. Next question. If I only do one thing with a signal that I find, what should I be? This is my really best advice. Signals are so powerful because they give us a concrete way to actually touch the future. If a signal exists, it's because someone is out there doing something. They're making the tech, they're building the company, they're passing the law, they're evangelizing for a new way of doing things. And the best thing to do with a signal is to reach out and grab it. Send someone an email, go to an event, get involved in some way. If there's a signal that really captures your attention, just go out there, make a personal connection, because signals are so valuable as ways to increase your ability to actually change the future. These are real concrete things that you can get involved with to shape the future today. And finally, the last FAQ. I get this one all the time, which is, how do I know if it's really a signal and not just some noise? Well, let me share with you something that we often say at the Institute. A signal is like art. It's hard to define, but you know one when you see one. And this is so true. Spotting signals is really like a kind of skill and intuition that you just have to build confidence in over time. And that confidence can really start to develop when, as the weeks and months and even years pass, you start to see evidence that some of the signals you collected really did turn into something big. They really were a turning point or a tipping point for change to start to happen. And as you start to build up this collection of signals that you found before anyone else, then you'll really develop confidence in your ability to sense and intuit what makes a powerful signal. Welcome to your final week of your Introduction to Future Thinking course. Last week you practiced collecting and analyzing signals, and this week we're going to start with a tool that we call Look Back to Look Forward, and it's designed to help you get better at noticing change. And as an introduction to this tool, I want to do another little thought experiment with you. I want you to remember and imagine yourself 10 years ago today. So subtract 10 years from your age and put yourself back in that time. This is that magic time scale again, that 10-year time scale. And I want you to look back at that 10 years ago version of yourself and try to think about what your life was like at that time. Where were you living? What kind of work were you doing? If you were working, or what were you learning? What didn't you know yet? What were your biggest goals at the time? What were your biggest challenges and problems? Who did you see every day? Where did you go every day? Try to immerse yourself back in this 10 years older ago version of yourself. And now that you're there, I want to ask you a question. 10 years ago, what are 2 ways that you or your life was really different? I mean, really, really different. What would you say are 2 of the biggest changes that you've personally been through over the last decade? I can answer these questions. 10 years ago, I was not a parent yet, and that's probably been the biggest change. Now I have 4-year-old twin daughters who take up more of my time and energy than probably anything else. Another big change is I used to live in downtown San Francisco, right in the middle of the city, and if you had asked me back then, I was gonna live in a city forever. And now I live on a mountain in a forest, and that is something I definitely would not have predicted, but it makes sense to me now. My life has changed, the city of San Francisco has changed, and that's where it makes sense for me to live now. So can you think of 2 changes like that for yourself? And I want you to pause the video and give yourself a moment to really reflect and take in these changes. Were these changes that you would have predicted? Did you make these changes on purpose? They were goals that you pursued, or did they just happen to you? Did they take you by surprise? What were the ripple effects of these changes across all the areas of your life? Go ahead and give yourself a minute to really take this in, and then we'll come back and talk about why this will help you think more creatively about the future. Thank you for doing that. And now you might be wondering, what's the point of this thought experiment? Why are we thinking about the past when this is a course on thinking about the future? Well, today is the future that we would have been thinking about 10 years ago. And reflecting on all of the changes that have happened since 10 years ago was the present can help us get better at recognizing how quickly things can change and how big those changes can be. When we project ourselves into the future, too often we imagine lives and circumstances that are really similar to today, and we have to kind of break through that mindset. So reflecting on how much and how fast things have changed in the past puts us in a much more powerful mindset to think creatively about the change that could be coming. One of your optional readings for this week is an excerpt from Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. And she writes, "We adjust to changes without measuring them. We forget how much has changed." She suggests that we need to look back at just how much has actually changed in order to build realistic hope for the future. Whether the changes have been for the better or the worse, if big changes have happened before, big changes can happen again. This is her advice, and it's advice that every futurist should keep in mind. Anything could happen because anything already has. Throw out assumptions that things will remain the same. Assess the wildly changed world we inhabit and start over with an imagination adequate to the possibilities and strangeness of life on Earth at this moment. With that advice in mind, the tool you're about to learn will help you throw out all of your assumptions about any future and start over with a more powerful imagination. This tool is called Look Back to Look Forward, and it's one of 20 tools that we use as the basis for our professional certification program here at the Institute for the Future. We've picked 5 of our favorite, most powerful tools to share with you in the specialization. And of course, if you'd like to get trained in all 20 of them, you're welcome to join us at our trainings in Palo Alto or our trainings anywhere around the world.
Hi, I'm Ben Hamamoto, and I'm a research director here at the Institute for the Future. My work focuses primarily on looking at the social implications of new technology, and I'm here to teach one of my favorite tools from our Foresight Training Toolkit, Look Back to Look Forward. One of the reasons that I love this tool is because it's really intimidating to start thinking about the future, right? I mean, most of us feel like you have to kind of go out on a limb if you're going to express an opinion about what you think might happen in the future. But when you're looking back in the past, that's something that everybody's an expert on. You can just say this happened and there's no real controversy about that. And so it's a really easy way for people to start thinking about how change happens without having to go out on a limb and express an opinion or have take any sort of risk in any way. When would you use this tool? Well, this is a perfect tool for beginning any sort of exploration of the future. Anytime you want to think about what's possible in the future, it's always great to think about how change has happened in the past. There's this maxim that we have as futurists that anytime you're looking to the future, trying to figure out what's possible, you have to look at least twice as far back in the past. Ready to look back to look forward? Here's what to do. First, pick a topic. It can be a big topic like the internet or marriage or higher education, or a place like Mexico City or Singapore, or something very specific like the company you work for or a club you belong to. Next, pick a timescale to think about. It should be long enough to reveal large historical changes. This could be anywhere from 20 years in the past to 1,000 years in the past, depending on how long the topic you're thinking about has existed. We recommend you go back at least twice as far as you want to look forward. If you're using this tool on your own, take some time to list different moments of change. These should be very specific, like a historic event, a new law, a new discovery or innovation, a new business, or some other big change in how things work. If you're using this tool with a group, ask everyone to spend 5 to 10 minutes brainstorming their own moments of change. Write each change on a different card or sticky note, so you can arrange them on a timeline according to when each happened. Just by creating this record of change, you're helping demonstrate that change is possible and that it can happen faster than we expect. It's a good idea after you've created your timeline of change to pick one of a few moments of change and think about them more deeply. What made this change possible? What effort did it require? How long did it take to happen? And how quickly did things change after? What ripple effects did that change have in unexpected ways? And now you know, that's how you look back to look forward. Welcome back. I'm Ben Hamamoto, and I'm going to be demoing Look Back to Look Forward with my illustrious guest, Katie Joseph. Katie is an expert in the future of communications, in particular the future of computational propaganda, and I'm really thrilled to have her demoing this tool with me. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be going over this tool with you today.
Great. So I understand you've done some pre-work for this already. You've already selected a topic that we're going to be exploring today. What's the topic that you chose?
Well, I'm really curious about how we're going to communicate with our families and friends in the future. I was thinking about virtual reality and augmented reality and chatbots, which is something we study a lot in propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
What is it going to be like, to talk if we have kids or grandkids? What's it going to be like to talk to them?
Yeah.
And it'll probably be hard to adjust too, because, you know, my grandma has such trouble talking on Skype, but, you know, she gets the phone, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think we're all going to have to learn how to communicate in new ways in the coming years and decades to come. So I believe you've also pre-selected some moments of change for this exercise. Do you want to start with what's sort of the first moment of change, or the first marker that you want to put on our timeline here?
Right. So I went way back to 10,000 BC when, you know, we just spoke to each other in the same space and we couldn't communicate across space or time. And yeah, you were just talking to the people in your hunter-gatherer tribe.
That is pretty far back. Yeah, that's a great baseline to kind of start from. So what's the first moment of change that you really saw from this kind of baseline of humans just talking to each other like we're talking to each other now?
Yeah, well, I think like one of the biggest changes was the invention of mail. And so in 550 BC, the Persians invented mail, which meant that you could talk to someone so far away from you, not just the person next to you. And also, you know, there's kind of the time dimension too. You can send a letter, you know, over a long time and the person gets the message a few months later, so.
Yeah, no, that is really profound when you think about it, that going from just being able to kind of talk in live in person to being able to communicate across time and space, that's a huge moment of change.
I know. I also, I was thinking the other day, I was like, how did people have arguments over mail? Because, you know, it's so far apart, like, can you even keep up the argument over many years? I don't know. But
yeah, no, you probably have to do some like anticipating of what the other person's going to write and sort of have a few. Yeah, your rhetoric probably has to be in pretty good shape. So what's the next moment of change that...
So in 1854, though, you know, different times phones were invented. So now you could call someone and talk to them in real time and hear their voice, which is just so wild when you think about it. Like, yeah, I could call you up and hear your voice even if we lived so far apart from each other.
Yeah, yeah. So this first moment of change you had was sort of communicating across distance, and this is communicating across distance but live at the same time. That is a pretty profound change. So what's the next moment of change that you have here?
So in 1910, people in, you know, the US at least started getting phones in their home. So now you could just be in the comfort of your home or competing with your siblings to talk to your friend down the street, and, you know, you could talk at all hours of the night or, you know, daytime. And so I think that's much more convenient and intimate.
So it's a very similar technology, but sort of much more accessible in this case. It's not something that people only do every once in a while. It's something that's accessible to them all the time in pretty much, you know, any context, at least as long as they're home.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, what's the next big moment of change you have?
In 1995, emails were invented. Now you could send, you know, a message. Oh, it's like sending a letter, but much quicker. And you can also, you know, talk in real time, but through text, which was a big change.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could also potentially send emails to multiple people at once. So
exactly.
Almost like a distribution system.
Right. And I think it was also started to, you know, share ideas. And so in the academic setting, people could share research and things like that. So I think that helped people start collaborating on a broader scale in groups like you were talking about.
Very cool. Okay, so what's the next big moment of change you have here?
2000, texting, which is a big change that we all remember. Yes.
I do.
Yeah, me too, yeah. I guess maybe some of you don't.
And so this is very much like email, but it's on a mobile device. So it's not just sort of sitting at home at a computer and, you know, logging on to something. It's sort of having that kind of text communication reach you anywhere at any time on a handheld device.
Right, and also we had to like kind of adapt because the keyboards, you couldn't use a whole, you know, full keyboard, and so people started adapting new lingo, and so that was kind of interesting, the trendy slang. Only 3 years later, in 2003, Skype was invented.
And for those of us who don't know, what is Skype?
So Skype was a streaming service where you could talk to each other over voice. It wasn't until 2006 when they added video, but you could talk to people anywhere in the world who had this program on their computer. So, you know, my friend who's in Singapore, she downloaded Skype, and we could communicate with each other. And you could also, communicate with people just by getting their username, and so it was much more accessible, and it wasn't didn't cost money too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually, I totally forgot that Skype really was voice first, that video calls came a few years later. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think it kind of made the international calling so much easier, because it's still so expensive to call people internationally on a normal phone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so next I see you have
2010. 2010, the advent of FaceTime on the iPhone. So now you can just, instead of just calling your friend normally through voice, you can FaceTime all the time and see their beautiful face.
So it's kind of like the move from email to text in a way, right? It's having the ability to do video calls, but as opposed to being set in one place on like a laptop or a desktop, you're actually able to, on a mobile device, do video calls anytime.
Yes, exactly. I'm a big fan of FaceTime. That's like the only form of communication I use. I don't text people back, but I love to FaceTime.
That's awesome. And your last moment of change you have here, 2015.
Right, so it's 2015, which could be debated, but emojis replace text. So now it's kind of circling back all the way to when there's pictograms and such like that, when people were writing, and now we're using emojis instead of words, and you can infer meaning from those emojis and different combinations of emojis.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's sort of the first digital language in all of these. That in all of these other mediums, you're using existing characters and language, and this is actually sort of a whole new set of communication glyphs that's specific to the new medium. That's really cool.
I love that point. Yeah, that there's kind of like this new language that arose, and I guess it's kind of also universal. You can send an emoji to someone who doesn't speak the same language as you, and they can infer what it means.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. So kind of looking at this whole timeline that we have here that spans all the way back to 10,000 BC, what do we see collectively?
Things have changed so dramatically. Humans are so good at innovating. It really amazes me, I feel being in Silicon Valley, it's so easy to get caught up in current day innovations and really looking to the future. And it's look how much we have accomplished, as species in ways of communicating with each other.
You have 10,000 BC, and then it jumps to 550 BC, and then to 1854 AD. That's a pretty big jump, but as you go farther down the timeline, the intervals become much shorter. These major moments of change in communication are happening more and more rapidly. So this was a really great demo that you've sort of put together here for Look Back to Look Forward. You're in great shape for forecasting the future, and now you too are ready to use this tool, Look Back to Look Forward, and start forecasting the future yourself. Thank you very much.
Welcome back. I'm excited about today's video because we are going to start by playing a game. And this is a game you can play by yourself or in a small group or in a huge group. The most people I've ever played it with was over 1,000 people, all playing together in the same room at the same time. But today we're going to do a two-player version, just you and me. And here's how it works. I want you to think of one of the futures that you chose as your future of X in the first week of this course. Maybe you chose future of healthcare or future of virtual reality or future of food. Pick just one of those futures and hold it in your mind. Okay, so do you know which future you've picked? Okay, let's play. Keeping that specific future in mind, I want you to take a look at the spectrum. When you think about this specific future, do you think right now it's getting better or worse? Are things heading in a better direction or a worse direction? And there's no right or wrong way to answer this question, and you don't have to give me any specific reasons or explanations. Just at a gut level, how do you feel? Are things getting better or worse as you head into this particular future? And I want you to touch the screen and put your finger where you would place your answer. Way over on the left side, it means you think things are just falling apart. It's basically the apocalypse. On the right side, things are headed towards a perfect utopia. Pick a spot somewhere on the spectrum, and I want you to keep your finger there. Now, don't move your finger. We're going to add another dimension to this question. Thinking about the same future, how much power do you personally have to shape or influence this future? At the very bottom of the screen, you feel like you have no power at all. Zero influence. Literally nothing you do will make a difference. You are just along for the ride. At the very top, you're basically the most powerful person in the world when it comes to this future. You are going to change the course of history. You are large and in charge. And in the middle, maybe you are optimistic. You feel like you might be able to influence it, but you're kind of still looking for those levers to push. Now, the trick here is to keep your finger where it is on the better or worse axis and just move it up or down along the powerful or powerless axis so you wind up in one of the 4 squares. And the way we figure out the results of this game is by figuring out which square you wound up in. Are you in square 1, 2, 3, or 4? Let's do a poll and find out now. Just let us know. Before we talk about what your number means, I want to make sure that I get across a really important idea, which is that the point of future thinking is not to change where you fall on the spectrum of whether you think a particular future is getting better or worse. This is related to objective reality. I mean, some futures are getting better and some futures are getting worse. And it's good for you to be in tune with that reality, and nothing about futures thinking is designed to change your perception of what direction we're heading. What we want to do with futures thinking is change where you fall on the other spectrum of feeling like you have no power at all to influence the future, or feeling like you have all the power in the world to determine how that future turns out. All of the tools that you're going to learn in this course, all of the techniques and methods and skills, every single one of them is designed to move you up the spectrum of power so that after using that tool, you feel like you are just a little bit closer to being able to become one of the people who has a big say in how that future turns out. And by the way, you might be in a different square depending on the future you're looking at. So you can really hold all 4 future states of mind at the same time, just depending on which future you're looking at when. What do you do with the results of this game? Well, first of all, this is a really interesting icebreaker or conversation starter for any kind of meeting where you're going to be planning for the future, or any kind of event where you want to help people come together to think about the future collectively. What we do at the Institute for the Future is we actually have people stand up and answer these questions physically. So we have them move to the right and left of the room if they feel like it's getting better or worse, or to the front and back of the room if they feel like they have no power or lots of power. And then we have everybody standing up in different parts of the room. We can look around and see, it gets a really great image of where people are when they're thinking about a particular future. And then we can talk to outliers. Find the person at the most front of the room, find the person closest to the back of the room, the furthest to the right, the furthest to the left. And this really helps tease out different people's diverse points of view on the future so that you can really meet each other where you are and understand that people bring different feelings and perspectives to the same future. It's also a really strategic, practical tool. Over the course of this specialization, you're going to learn dozens of different techniques and skills for thinking about the future. And depending on which square you fall into when you think about a particular future, a different set of skills or techniques can actually be the most powerful and beneficial for you to use to think about that future where you are. Let me show you what I mean. Here we've mapped the next 4 courses in this sequence onto the 4 squares: forecasting skills, simulation skills, collaborative gaming skills, and action skills. In the next video, we'll define each of these 4 types of skills and how to use them depending on where you land on the future 4 square. We're almost done with the first stage of our journey, our introduction to futures thinking. And let me just say, you're amazing. Let's keep going together. As you progress in this specialization, you're going to be learning and practicing 4 different types of future thinking skills. Let's take a look at what they are and how they relate to that future 4 square game that you just played. Forecasting skills. This is level 1. Our default tendency is to believe that the future will be largely like the present, but this is rarely true. For majority of people, the future comes as a surprise or even a shock. With strong forecasting skills, you can overcome this bias and become better prepared to adapt and benefit from change. You've already started to learn how to forecast the future by gathering signals or clues about how the world is already starting to change. These signals include new technologies, big ideas, and other global forces that have the power to change what's possible. And you practice techniques for thinking both analytically and creatively about these signals, so you can imagine even bigger transformations that haven't happened yet. In the next course, to deepen your forecasting skills, you'll also learn how to turn groups of signals into compelling scenarios. Scenarios are evidence-based, but often surprising visions of the future. They can help you illuminate new possibilities and opportunities for yourself, for your company, or for any community you want to inspire. We'll show you exactly how it's done. Leading futurists will share with you the scenarios that they're most excited about right now and walk you through the key steps they took to create them. Forecasting skills help you see hard-to-imagine futures before they happen. They enable you to consider possibilities that others might never see coming or refuse to accept. With this foresight, you can evaluate which futures you want to make more likely and which futures you want to prevent. Simulation skills. This is level 2. Humans are the only living creatures with the ability to think about and make plans for the long-term future. Even so, our brains don't always make it easy. Over the past decade, scientists have discovered a number of neurological roadblocks to effective futurist thinking. These glitches in the brain make it harder for us to accurately predict how we'll feel and what we're likely to do when and if a particular future arrives. They lead us to make faulty assumptions about which futures are unlikely or likely to happen, and they convince us that we have less power to shape and influence the future than we actually do, leaving us stuck in the present. In our Coursera course on simulation skills, you'll learn how to overcome these obstacles so you can think about the future more strategically and creatively. You'll practice simulation techniques for unsticking the mind when it comes to seeing what's possible in the future and accepting how things could be different. You'll also learn how to lead others through first-person future simulations, which have been shown in scientific studies to increase motivation and hope for the future. Along the way, leading futurists from the Institute will share some of their most challenging forecasts to help you stretch your imagination and improve your simulation skills. If a forecast tells you what the world around you might be like in the future, simulation skills help you figure out what other people might do in that world and what you can do in that world to make a positive difference. This course will ensure that you can put all your new forecasting skills to the best possible use by helping you nudge your brain toward more effective ways of simulating and preparing for what exactly might happen in the future world you forecasted and imagined. Collaborative gaming skills. This is level 3. You'll never have a complete picture of the future if you look at it from just one point of view. The best way to expand your vision? Engage as many people as you can, cultivate diverse perspectives, and game out the possibilities together. In this course, you'll learn how to use collaborative gaming techniques to help you go beyond your own thinking and see many, many different sides of the same future. Over the past decade, the Institute for the Future has pioneered new methods in massively multiplayer foresight. You'll learn how to adapt these methods to get diverse, surprising views of what's possible, build your empathy for other people's futures, and reduce your risk of being blindsided by the future consequences. Action skills, or what we call urgent optimism, help you take all of the foresight skills you've developed so far and apply them to making real positive change in your life, in your work, and in the world around you. In our Coursera course on urgent optimism and action foresight, you'll learn how to create and share preferred futures, which are highly persuasive, compelling visions of the changes you want to make real. You'll use your preferred future to identify obstacles, recruit allies, collect resources, and plan actions to make your vision real. You'll also practice making artifacts from the future, which are creative representations of how everyday life might be different in the future. Artifacts can inspire others to join you in your quest to make a preferred future real. In this course, Futurists will share with you some of their favorite future artifacts and walk you through the entire creative process it took to make them. Every action we take today changes the future, and action skills will help you identify and take the actions that make the biggest impacts on the most urgent challenges you and society face. So how do these 4 types of futures thinking skills line up with where you landed in the future Foursquare? Well, let's take a look at the numbers. If you wound up in square number 1, if you feel like your future is getting better, but you don't personally have a lot of power or say in how it gets better, then we recommend forecasting skills, because forecasting skills are really good for helping you find concrete examples of that positive change so you can get involved and find new allies and find new opportunities to actually become one of the people who's taking the future in that better direction. And you've already learned some of these skills, like finding signals, and you'll also learn how to come up with scenarios that can tell really compelling stories about the role that you personally or your community or your company might play in pushing the future in this positive direction. Now let's say you wound up in square number 2. If you feel like the future is getting worse and you personally have no power to make it any better, this is where we recommend starting with simulation skills. Simulation skills are all about unsticking your mind and really pushing the boundaries of what kind of change you think is possible. If you were feeling hopeless, simulation skills are for you. For example, we'll teach you one skill called 100 Ways Anything Could Be Different. And this skill requires you to literally think of 100 ways that the future you've imagined could be different. And by undertaking these types of exercises, you can really pull yourself out of square number 2, which is really not a pleasant place to be, and find ways that the future might get better or ways that you could push it in a better direction. Let's say you're in square number 3. If you feel like the world is getting better, the future that you are thinking about is getting better, and you are a huge part of that, you have a role to play in making that future, we recommend the collaborative gaming skills. Collaborative gaming will help you get outside your own perspective and make sure that you're not missing anything, that in your enthusiasm and optimism, you haven't overlooked any potential risks or harms, or that you're not ignoring how the future you want to build might harm somebody else. And by engaging lots of other people and gaming out the future that you're actively trying to build, you can make sure that it really is getting better for everyone. The last square, square number 4, this is where you feel like the future is headed in a worse direction, but you personally have tools and ideas for making it better. You feel empowered. This is a great space for you to use the urgent optimism and action skills, because these skills are all about conveying your alternate vision of the future or your preferred vision of the future and starting to build the team that you need to make it real, whether you're building a company or you're building a community or building a movement. The skills in this action foresight space will help you start turning that future around and using your ideas to make a better future real. With these 4 types of skills at your disposal, wherever you wind up, wherever your current future state of mind, you are going to have the creativity and strategy and resources you need to shape that future for the better.
I started my career as a school teacher, and as a teacher, you think a lot about your lesson for the day, your unit over the course of 2 weeks, your semester over the course of 18 of those weeks, a year in the course of like 9 months or 10 months. You don't really think 10 years into the future. Even as a high school teacher working with freshmen, perhaps the furthest you see into the future is 4 years when that freshman becomes a senior and graduates. So hanging out with futurists for me has forced me to think about things in a much longer term. to imagine change in a longer continuum, and to think that maybe the contributions that we make now can actually manifest things that we dream, even if we're not alive to see them come into fruition. I think it takes people all over the world to envision a better future and to wrestle the power of determining what that future is from those who want to maintain a status quo, want to maintain a certain authority or power, are looking to gain a profit while other people suffer. I think that those who are closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And so, you know, I encourage anyone who's listening to this or engaging in futures thinking to really think about how can they make a better future for everyone and get out of the individualistic mind state that one person's profit is somehow everybody's profit. I think in the past, when we've thought about the future, we've thought about it individually, how individuals can rise to success, how individual communities or companies, or how majority opinions can become the norm for everyone. And I think it's important that we identify the marginalized positions, those have been outside of the conversation. And all of us, no matter where we are, can take part in making those voices central to the future. Young people are often talked about as being the future, but they're rarely in the room when conversations are happening about the future. So I think in the future of even conversations that are centered around emergent technologies or social responsibility around transformative technologies, that there will be young people in that space who are learning to work and use those things to the advantage of the future, and not centered around how we can make a profit from it, but more centered around how the world can become a better place.
What we're really trying to pioneer is that being an artist in the future is a sustainable career, that having your creative endeavor can both serve as a small business and serve many, many, many people to get to better states of life. One of the things that the Institute has really given me is the ability to scan the horizon and see signals, and to really pick up on those signals and understand the way that could manifest in the future, and how that will affect my artists and our business, and how we can serve artists in a different way. So, for example, Spotify just launched that they're going to make your DNA come to life through a musical experience by hooking up with Ancestry.com. And so let's say that in the future, as more and more people mix, as more and more people are different ethnicities, bicultural, tricultural, we can actually make those things come to life with the lens of music. And cultural fluidity will be the future. So just by kind of that signal today, we can see how it might manifest in the future, and then we can guide our businesses and also guide our artists towards that future and creating that future. I think people can look around in their contexts and think about where music can fit in and where artists can really co-create better futures with us. So in healthcare, in education, in technology, in elderly care, in new spaces like automation, where is music going to be, and where is culture going to be, and how can we build those into our systems today?
A futures thinking project I'm working on right now is with Emerson College in Boston and the Department of Justice in Massachusetts, where we're looking at creating a new type of training for women who are re-entering society after long-term prison sentences. The problem we're trying to solve is that in the state of Massachusetts, 1 in 3 women after they leave prison end up back in prison within 3 years. Futures thinking seems like a really effective tool for intervention because it allows these women to step into and simulate their futures that they're going to be experiencing when they get out in the real world. We worked with the women in prison, the pre-release population, to co-create these scenarios. So they're real world scenarios that they are actually nervous about. And through that, we went to Boston and filmed these 360-degree videos that allow the women to step into these futures, literally, virtually step into these futures. It's sort of like exposure therapy for stressful situations, so that these women can feel more confident when they actually encounter these types of situations in the real world. Situations like applying for a job after you've been in prison for a long time, situations like getting in a car with a friend and you find out there's maybe illegal drugs or alcohol in the car, situations even as sort of simple as being in a subway that's busy and crowded and having to ask for help from strangers. This is a unique project for the Institute for the Future because it's not a far-off future. It's actually very near term. A lot of these women will be getting out within a few months, even a few weeks. But being incarcerated for such a long time can make the real world feel as strange and unfamiliar as a future a decade away. Of course, with this type of project, we will be following up with all the people going through the pilot program to make sure it is effective in reducing recidivism for women in the state of Massachusetts. Currently, though, everyone who's gone through the project has reported back that it has not only helped them build confidence around future situations, but actually feel like they're more in control of their own future as they re-enter society.
In the next decade, I'd love to see a wide range of creative approaches to housing in the state of California and beyond. In our particular community, we're exploring things like alternative accessory dwelling units, even tiny home sets of communities, housing that's really optimized for guarding against this social isolation that a lot of people feel when they're in urban environments. And so we need to design spaces to be able to help anticipate that that's a challenge and to create avenues and mechanisms for people to live in a way that's going to be more vibrant and vital for the community. Being immersed in the world of foresight, the emotions of it really stand out. When you're encountering a particular piece of futures thinking, the future of transit or the future of retail or whatever that topic area is, it inevitably conjures these emotions, your hopes about the future or your fears about the future. And I've found that really powerful in my work to just have that as a baseline expectation when I'm engaging with community members and trying to make forward motion on something, to know that there is going to be this swirl of emotions and to invite people to stay in that place and actually name, if I let myself hope about X, Y, or Z topic, my hope is that, or, if I'm honest, my fear is. So in practical terms, when we've been pursuing building more housing in downtown Reading, as a matter of course, in planning processes, you have these public engagement meetings, and they're usually rather dry, and people are saying, how would you like to see the trees along this street? Questions that people don't necessarily feel equipped to answer. But in in fact, they do have these emotions, their hopes and fears about this particular future that's playing out that'll change their daily rhythms. And just being exposed to foresight and futures thinking helped me to realize that that's a conversation worth having, and in fact, it's a precondition for being able to move forward. For other people who want to foster a future that they hope for in the world, I think it's that discipline of constantly scanning for signals of change in the environment, things that you can point to that are specific, that just show, they illustrate the future's edge of a particular issue. And, you know, I live in a community that we joke in Redding, California, that it's like things hit our community of 90,000 that's in far inland and far northern California. They hit, 10 years later than they do the rest of California. But nevertheless, if you look, if you cultivate a community of people who are scanning for those signals of change, they really are all around. And that's really the starting place.
Congratulations, you have finished this course. You have mastered your introduction to futures thinking. I think that's awesome, and I hope you take some time today to really celebrate this accomplishment. And I want you to keep using these skills. Go out there and collect some signals, ask the big four questions, play the future Foursquare game with somebody and ask them what futures they're interested in and how they feel about them right now. And while you're at it, maybe invite that person to take the specialization with you so you can build your future thinking skills together and change the future together. I hope I will see you in the next course. If you are up for the challenge, let's keep going.